Welcome, friends. Thank you all for joining us. So happy to see so many familiar faces and folks I'm looking forward to getting to know on the call today. Is Carlos Medina, pronouns he, him, his, Learning Services Manager at Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial Counties. And I'd like to thank you for joining us for Grantmaking 101, how to incorporate a racial equity lens in your grant-making practices. So I just want to start off as folks are rolling in, probably transitioning from prior meetings and just settling into today's discussion. I want to go over a few. Actually, I'm going to try turning my video off to see if that helps with my internet connection. So thank you for your patience, folks. And to kick off, I provide here some remarks about this session in terms of housekeeping. The session is recorded. We will include a link to the recording, a little email, so folks can check that out afterwards. Additionally, we are encouraging you to add any questions that you have in the chat throughout the conversation. This really is an opportunity for you to engage with our speakers, so feel free to chime in and we'll weave those in through the session. And lastly, at the end, we'll have an evaluation poll that we would appreciate folks just spending a minute or two to complete that data, because it'll be critical for us as we use that data to evaluate and improve future programs. So with all that technical stuff out of the way, let's get into the fun stuff about today's session. And thinking about grant-making, COVID relief taught us grant-making is adaptable. We've seen examples of rapid deployment of funds. We've all seen focus on general operating and infrastructure support and the funding restricted reporting requirements. Last year, actually, we also saw renewed public attention to racial justice. And you know what, folks? I apologize. I see my audio is a little tricky, so let me try giving this a call in real quick. I appreciate your patience. What I would like to do is if I can just kick it over to our speakers for quick introductions, and I'll call right back in. Thank you, folks. Can I hand it over to you, Cece, and then to Michelle, and then to Marisa?
Great, thank you. Thank you, Carlos. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Cece Gartner Glazer. I use she, her pronouns. I'm calling in from Seattle. I'm the Director of Programs, and what else do I do there? Strategic Initiatives at the Satterberg Foundation, and we are based in Seattle, Washington, and our funding areas are Washington State, California, and now Arizona. And we give multi-year unrestricted funding and a couple of other fun things. And I will stop there and pass it to Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Michelle Jaramillo, Director of Education Initiatives at the San Diego Foundation, where I work with some wonderful colleagues that are actually on the line today. Happy to see you all here. At my work at the San Diego Foundation focuses on strategies that help us ensure that all students have the opportunity to not only access, but persist and complete their post-secondary dreams. We do that through a variety of strategies, namely strategic needs-based steps and other projects and strategies that really help us get students, all students, and particularly those students that are underrepresented in the graduating classes of our 4-year and 2-year institutions, helping them get to and through college graduation. And I've spent a lot of time, probably the better part of my career, thinking about philanthropy's imperative and how we organize to meet that imperative. Have done it through my professional life, and also have had the pleasure of working with an incredible group of women at the Latina Giving Circle, an incredible group of folks at Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy to explore that, that exercise. And so I'm really glad to be here and having this conversation with you all.
Hi, friends. I'm Marisa. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces and names here. I work with the International Community Foundation. I'm the Vice President of Programs there. The International Community Foundation has been around for about 30 years. We were born out of the San Diego Foundation. We work in 14 countries internationally. Our goal is to give investments across borders, investing in the transformative power of community. And let's see, our focus is, it's really intersectional. So education, health, humanitarian work. We're a team of 13, small but mighty. And I'm so thrilled to be here with you all to discuss grant making and some of the practices, some of the things that we can do to build movements within the ecosystems that we're working with. So thank you, Megan, thank you, Cece, thank you, Michelle, and Carlos for inviting me here today.
Can't hear you, Carlos. Nope, you have to unmute everything, I think.
Okay, I appreciate your patience, folks.
There you go.
Oh. Okay, perfect. Is there an echo or can folks hear me just fine? Wonderful. All right. So thank you, Marisa and Michelle. One thing I can relate to what you said, Marisa, is small but mighty team, because at Catalyst, we definitely are a small but mighty team. And one thing that in my tenure at Catalyst, I've seen this last year is how folks are responding to trust-based philanthropy as an opportunity to incorporate a racial equity lens into their work. Now, trust-based philanthropy cannot be operationalized without addressing built-in biases, systemic racism, and other inequalities. And so that's going to be the springboard for our conversation today. And so I'd like to start with a question to you, Cece. I know the Satterberg Foundation is committed to equitable and trust-based philanthropy for a just and sustainable environment. Now, a key principle of trust-based philanthropy is doing the homework, meaning it's the funder's responsibility to get to know the prospective grantees. And so I wanted to ask you, what does this approach look like? And what is the difference that it makes for both the partners and for you?
Thank you, Carlos. I think for us at Satterberg, I think starting at the beginning, we hire folks on staff that aren't in philanthropy, so that we don't have all of those kind of bad habits of, and really kind of buying into this idea that this is a real thing and that it's hard. For many folks, communities of color, we have been doing philanthropy for generations and surrounding each other and holding space for family and showing up when family needs us. So this isn't a new concept, but I think there's been so much work around creating a sector, like making philanthropy like this real thing with rules. And really at the end of the day, this is about facilitating the return of resources to communities that need it, trusting the organizations. And the way that we see it is our privilege and honor to partner with these organizations. So we really build relationships with our current grantee partners. We want to build trust and then have our grantee partners introduce us to some of the folks that they work with in community. And it's been so fun to schedule meetings with organizations. And then, as soon as we get on the call, we do the introductions and everything. And then the organization is like ready to go in and say, oh, this is how many people we serve. This is how we do the work. And we're like, wait, can we stop you for a minute? We're here to pitch you. We've already decided that we want to partner with you and we want to return resources to you because of the work you do and how you show up in community. And what we're here to know is if you even want to partner with us, are we worthy of partnering with you? Just, and really trying to drive home that point of all money is not good money. Not all partners are going to be aligned. And really putting the power, trying to shift power into the hands of the nonprofits, because the only reason that philanthropy exists is to return the resources to community. Like that's it. And we need to show up in the gaps and provide resources so that folks can do the work that they need to do because of systemic racism and how we got here. So that has been interesting. And folks are like, wait, what? We're like, well, maybe, someone can help us like write a grant, we can raise money for that. And I'm like, no, there's no application at this point. We're here because we know about you, and we just needed our grantee partner to do the introduction so that you know, like vouching for us in a way, and we've been vetted, but we're trying to build trust with the folks in the community and show up for them in a way that I think philanthropy hasn't done in the past, where philanthropy, folks that work in philanthropy as funders, like somehow we think we know all the answers, we know all the things, and we need to tell you how to do the work because, you know, we read that article or that white paper that maybe some of us have written about experiences that we have never lived. And we just need to shift all of that and stop pretending that philanthropy is real and that it's hard. I'll stop there.
No, thank you, Cece. Honestly, I could listen to you continue, but one thing I'd be curious to get your feedback on is I feel like this assessment is to avoid making a quote unquote bad grant. And I'd be curious to get your thoughts about that concept.
Yeah, we have talked about this a lot because I've heard a lot of funders say, oh, well, that was a bad grant, or you know, we shouldn't have done that, or we didn't know a lot. But I'm like, we take risk in so many different areas in our lives. Why are we afraid to take risks with money that's not even ours? You know, I mean, it's like even our own money, we do sometimes things that don't make the most sense, right? But when it comes to philanthropy, I think because of this power piece, it's like, oh my gosh, what if we give to an organization that's too small and they can't handle it? I assure you that nonprofits have so many ideas and ways to support community that if you gave them too much money, they have a million ideas on how to spend it and get it back to community. And so I'm like, how can there be a thing as such a thing as a bad grant? I mean, there could be bad grants in that we're giving funds to folks that already are getting all the funds, and we're getting funds to maybe some intermediaries that are led by folks not in community. So, you know, when the dollars go to like maybe a white-led organization that doesn't have the expertise or the lived experience, that then is like, thank you for this $2 million grant. Now what I'm gonna do is call the 5 PLC-led organizations that also applied that didn't get it and get them to help me do outreach to the communities of color so that I can give the money, because we actually don't know how to do this work. I think in those cases, those are the only bad grants we can do is if we continue to buy into, again, going back to the idea that philanthropy is real and that it's hard. That's when we get in trouble and make bad grants. But if we just listen to community, listen to what they need, and actually just show up and support them, all the grants will be good grants.
Agreed. Thank you, Cece. And that power imbalance that you acknowledged, I think, is important for funders to recognize and to set realistic expectations with their partners. And so I'd appreciate to shift it to Michelle and get your feed through the San Diego Foundation's San Diego COVID-19 Community Response Fund. You saw firsthand how many nonprofits couldn't wait for funds, and they needed to respond to crises and to their communities immediately. So how can streamlined approaches to deploying funds pave the way for deeper relationships?
The short answer is that there's no other way. Like, a streamlined approach to deploying funds forces the forging of relationship, forces the deploying of community knowledge. It's actually it's a sort of natural consequence. When we reduce the administrative burden on nonprofit organizations to perform to our grant program standards and do the homework on our side, and then lean into the community knowledge that is either resident or should be resident within our organizations, and if not resident within our organizations, available and activated through the relationships that we have with community members. It flows naturally. It sets you up naturally. When we reduce the administrative burden, we improve the relationship infrastructure. Simple. That's the short answer. The longer answer, I think, is both technical and cultural. I think it in how you actually administer a grant making program, every sort of data point you're removing out of that performance and leaning into the community knowledge that you have, or leaning into the other tools that you have to fill in those blanks, you're opening up opportunities for conversations with community members, more authentic, real community members. And you're also, you're being accountable. So you're stepping into that role of being accountable to that process. It is us coming together versus an entity coming to us, if that makes sense. And I just want to touch on the question that, just briefly, that Cece spoke to around what is a quote unquote risky grant. I think in all of this, we really have to interrogate ourselves. You know, what is happening in our mind's eye when we're thinking about what is a good investment, a sound investment versus a risky investment. And I think Cece is absolutely 1000% correct. I mean, every grant we make brings an inherent risk that maybe it wasn't a good fit, right? It's just the work that we're doing. But in our mind's eye, when we're triaging good investment from bad investment, if we're really paying attention to what's happening in our mind's eye, we will see the bias, right? We will see either the personal bias, the institutional bias, we will see it. And the exercise is about decolonizing that mindset. However it works, right? However that happens for you and your organization, whether it's adopting the trust-based philanthropy model or some other particular strategy. But I think that's the work. What's happening in our mind's eye, as people and our institutional mind's eye when we're making these determinations, and what do we have to unpack and decolonize about?
And I love that point, Michelle, because initially we were talking about like the speed at which funding needs to be deployed, but it sounds like you're also talking about a slowing down for the organization to reflect on their processes and why they've inherited them and the value of those processes. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, this has been on my mind a lot lately. I think the work of equity needs to be fast and it needs to be slow. So let's all chew on that for a second. It needs to be both things. I think what we saw last year in response to the COVID crisis was, quite frankly, a realization that for us in philanthropy, that community was telling us for a long time. We can't wait on your process. Folks are hurting now. How can we move the resources in a way that is commensurate with the urgency that nonprofit organizations are working on? So how do we get faster so that we are attentive and responsive to the nature of the issue, to the nature of the need, and not sort of prioritizing our processes over the needs of community? How do we go fast, get faster? But then equity is also about slowing down so that you can have conversations. And so especially grassroots organizations working in community can deploy their programs in the way that is most responsive to the community members and what the community members need and how they interact with the program or service at hand. I've been thinking a lot about recently, because of a project we've been working on, outreach, right? Sort of with communities of financial means that have high digital literacy, outreach can happen at a digital level. Opportunities can be presented and shared to those communities through email, websites, and we can get folks engaged and mobilized and connected to the offering at hand. When we're talking about communities, low-income communities, typically under-resourced communities, and often immigrant, refugee communities who are not English dominant, may have low digital literacy. The outreach is person to person, right? It's slower. The outreach is, it's personal, it's through a trusted messenger, and so it takes more time. And so we can't set a standard of let's roll something out quickly because folks will be able to sign on to something, and expect that outreach to be conducive to the communities that we're ultimately trying to serve and reach. So it's just been on my mind a lot. It's just been on my mind a lot. We really need to sort of slow down, to check ourselves, to check our biases, to create the right processes and the right flows. But we need to speed up too.
Definitely, I see reflection is critical to being able to act with intention. And so just being mindful of how important that time is, but then also moving quickly allows you to help position your grantee partners for success. And I think that's something that we're all here looking to position our grantee partners for success. And I know that Marisa has definitely shared some insights with me that I found very enlightening. And I'm curious to ask Marisa at the International Community Foundation, diverse portfolio of international grant partners. What are you noticing grantees need besides monetary support, and what does it look like for your team?
I'm so excited by this conversation because I must say, I have never attended a Grantmaking 101 conversation that looks quite like this. So what Michelle and Cece and what they have done is they've definitely advanced the conversation. And I would like to just say that every Grantmaking 101 conversation should be like this. We should be talking about our own implicit bias, our connection to wealth, our relationship to privilege and power and all of those things. At the International Community Foundation, in addition to grantmaking, the short answer to your question, Carlos, is access. Because philanthropy has typically expected community to meet us on our terms, the conversation now that we're having here in this moment is, how do we meet community on their terms? And so the whole slowing down, speeding up, I really appreciate, Michelle, that you're bringing that to this conversation, because I think part of the slowing down is just asking questions, right? Why are we doing it this way? Who decided this? Who benefits from this decision? Who is actually getting their power built by this move or this intervention, as philanthropy likes to call it? And so I think that in addition to grant making, we need to be inviting leaders into spaces where they do not currently have access, right? Can we make introductions for them? Can we stand by them when they're being challenged by an organization on why trust philanthropy matters? Can we stand in front of them? Can we stand by them? Can we stand in back of them in all of those things whenever they're needed as these conversations unfold and as philanthropy becomes more and more aligned with community? And so, my team was recently challenged in that we talk a lot about community and the communities we serve. And one of the things we noticed is that when we were talking about community, we didn't include funders in that conversation. It was like there's the funders and donors and there's the grantees. Even the language and the lexicon we use in philanthropy is problematic in that it perpetuates this separateness, right? Because really, community is the big idea. Community is the innovative force that brings us all together, that we all wish to be a part of. And so I think challenging our team continually is that slowing down that Michelle's talking about, right? How do we slow down to ask those important questions, to pause while still understanding the urgency of the moment and getting some of these, getting some of these things changed that really need some changing. So it really is about increasing access in addition to grants. And there's lots of different ways that we have been able to do that. I'll give one other example. ICF was one of the first to stand up and say, we want to be part of an effort to create through, it's the Freedom 100, it's a fund that allowed immigrants who were in immigration detention to post bail. And so what we learned was that there was a big need for immigrants who had been detained to post bail. Sometimes their bail was $1,500, but because they couldn't post it, they couldn't access it, they remained in immigration detention. One gentleman that we spoke to had been there for 7 years. His bail was $1,200 when it was finally posted. This fund, this impact investing opportunity, it wasn't a grant, it's a revolving loan. We were able to move some of our longer term kind of almost financing tools into this investment that then enables people to access that. And since then, others have come on to do the same kind of impact investing model. We've been able to get 100 people out of immigration detention. These are the kinds of things that we can do differently, right? So it's not necessarily a grant, it's an impact investing opportunity. It's a loan where we get a return, and it's putting those dollars for good now. So I challenge everyone, what can your endowments do beyond just sitting there accruing money? What good can they do to really advance the change we want to see in the world? And I'll stop there.
I had adjusted my tech, but I switched it back. Can folks hear me fine? Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Marisa. You pointed out what I was hearing is building the relationships for the partners, because the relationships are important infrastructure for the community partners, each other, and also with you. So that's a theme I think it's important for us to really recognize, is the value of those relationships and what they bring to us as funders, as well as our grantee partners. So we heard about the power imbalance and the value, rather the importance of recognizing that and implicit biases, how we can move forward and set realistic expectations following that reflection, and with setting those expectations, supporting grantee partners by positioning them for success. And one thing I would love to hear from folks, and I'll start with you, CC, is what is your vision for the future of philanthropy? What would you create or eliminate entirely to not just see incremental change, but also system-wide change?
That's a big question. I mean, I think so many things need to be eliminated, like reports and all of the things like that we think that we think helps us measure community. And something that I would love to see is folks holding funders accountable. Philanthropy has no natural predators. We have this IRS thing where we have to spend this little 5%, which people are really, and some funders will include not just their grant making, but then also operations cost as well. But that's like the only thing, right? And then if we don't spend the 5%, what happens? Are we fined, or someone gonna come lock our doors? I mean, it's accountability. Like, I would love to see funders be held accountable, where, particularly now when we're all into this racial equity, racial justice space, where many folks have made statements. It is time for nonprofits and for community to call those funders out. You made a statement in August of 2020, and you said you were going to do these 5 things. I want to know why you didn't do it. Or now that funders are doing more kind of racial equity, racial justice training, they've read a couple of books over the summer. I know our board did. And now we're at the place where, no, we only need to fund organizations that look like this. What does their board look like? What does the staff look like? And I'm like, I want nonprofits to start asking funders those same questions, like hold us accountable. But so often they'll be like, I don't want to fund this organization. You know, it doesn't have enough people of color. And I'm like, have you seen your board? Your board has no people of color. So how are you going to judge other folks on their work? So I want us to be held accountable at the same standard that we want to try to hold community accountable. And I think then we can see some shifts. And I would love to see more folks from community, from the nonprofit side, come into philanthropy, because I think that's been the way that Satterberg we've been able to shift things. Because many of us on staff have worked in nonprofits, we've written grants, and then coming onto the other side, we're like, why did funders ask this dumb question? Taking that dumbass question out, because that's not actually helping us make any of these decisions. That's how we got rid of our application. You know, because we've been on the other side and we're like, this is actually dumb. And are people really reading all of this? We just feel like, oh, everyone says you need an LOI application site visit. And now that we're here, I'm like, this makes no sense. This is ridiculous. So if we can actually listen to community, do what community tells us to do, and show up, and please have community start holding us accountable. Like, could you imagine if funders were turned down from nonprofits that were like, nah, I'm good. I've seen what your board looks like. I've seen who your partners are, and I don't want to mess with you. I don't need your $100,000 or whatever it is, to where funders need to be applying to nonprofits to facilitate the return of these resources, because that's why we exist and that's what we're supposed to be doing. But could you imagine if folks started turning down funders' money? That would be amazing.
Well, it's interesting because I have heard funders, particularly who my tenure at Catalyst, who have expressed that, rather nonprofits who expressed that they are very critical of who they accept funding from, because they have community prerogatives, and sometimes those fundings come with strings attached that really work against their community. And I think that's really refreshing. It's something that I have not heard of before, but I think it's part of that conversation that you're mentioning that's important for us all to be holding ourselves and our partners accountable.
Yeah, because I think with some funders, folks are starting to, oh, let's fund like the group that's most active in community, where the spokesperson is the top organizer in the city. And if we could just fund them and say we fund this organization on our website, we didn't even have to read a book or do any training or anything, because look at us, we fund such and such. And now nonprofits are starting to say, no, don't put us on your website because you gave us $5,000. We don't want to be affiliated, because y'all aren't really doing the work. And they're starting to use community as like, as a checkbox or something to give the illusion that they're doing the work.
I think that's a good point for all of us to reflect on, is to move away from the checkbox mentality of thinking that we've done enough and realizing it's an ongoing journey, that we're all in this together. And speaking on that journey, I'd love to ask Michelle, I'm still reflecting on a lot of what Cece said, but I'd also like to hear what thoughts come into your mind.
1,000% everything Cece said. I think the question then that comes up for me is how, right? How does that dynamic actually shift? And for me, part of it has to be a disruptive innovation. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if like nonprofits come together and forge their own, like national endowment for, I'm not sure what it is, but it's some disruptive innovation that really helps to move that needle on the seeding the power. Megan asked, is anyone doing pieces of this now? I'm trying to work on a little piece of this now. I had the immense pleasure of doing the master's program on nonprofit leadership and management with my comadre here, Marisa. It's how we met. So the program was worth it for me, right? At that point. So now I'm I have the pleasure of teaching a class on grantmaking. And I'm really trying to unpack all of this stuff with the students who are nonprofit practitioners. I'm trying to give them the inside scoop
Yes.
on what's going on in philanthropy and what their levers are. So that the conversation they're having with their funders can be informed, right? And can be informed with this information that we hold on to, don't tell anyone about, but can really serve a nonprofit forging a different type of conversation, a different type of relationship with a funder. So that's just a little way that I'm trying to do that in my work, is helping to share my own experience with students and practitioners. But yeah, I think I don't know what it is, but it needs to be some very disruptive innovation.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
And I think that it might not be something we know right now, but coming together and having these convenings able to meet with folks who are equally passionate about exploring what that innovation could look like and partnering towards those kinds of innovations. And so just a teaser, we'll be breaking out into virtual groups in a little bit to discuss what those could look like. But I would also really appreciate, Marisa, your perspectives on what's your vision for the future of philanthropy and what changes could we work towards together?
You know, I want to speak a little bit to the experience I had with the Latina Giving Circle, which is, you know, a regional effort here that started with just a couple of us that were really noticing that that there wasn't really an equal playing field in the spaces where we were showing up, and you know, being told crazy things like, well, Latinos don't give, so they're not really the target market that you should be going after. And we were like, well, we know that that's not true. We grew up with philanthropy. We just didn't call it that, right? Just like I grew up with environmentalism because we recycled and took the bus and I wore my Five Sisters hand-me-downs, and, you know, like, but we just didn't call it that. And so what I would like to see is just a shift in the thinking around who practices philanthropy. I think the kinds of philanthropy we're practicing right now and what I'm seeing in Latin America and the work that my team is doing is really just giving them access to American philanthropy, right? We're spending a lot of time teaching them the language of like, oh, hey, here's how you say it. Here's what, you know, here's how you get access. But really, I would love to see just the field in general acknowledge that there are other ways of giving.
Yes.
That are innate, right? That where there's a culture of care that already exists, that people are doing it and we can do it too. And we can do it in a way that is better aligned with some of those already existing community systems that are strong and thriving with or without us. That's the thing. Either we're gonna get on board or we're gonna be left behind. Like, it's really our choice and it's really up to us how we navigate this.
Cheers to that. I want to raise a glass to that, Marisa, and thank you all. And also, let me get a water bottle. Thank you to my colleague Melissa, who's going to help us break out into some small group discussions where we can elaborate on these further. And we're going to add a question to the chat. Also, just have this opportunity to explore with your colleagues on those innovative changes that you see.